Two adult men were laughing at a young woman attempting to work out. The gym was full, but no one intervened. That is until Terrence spoke up and caused everyone to stop ignoring the situation. The familiar scent of sweat and rubber filled the air. Dumbbells made a clunking sound, treadmills vibrated, and a few early gym goers strained through their exercises with headphones on. It was a little after 7 a.m. at Ironworks Fitness in Knoxville, Tennessee. A typical Tuesday for many, but for Terrence Roy, it was leg day. Leg day held a special significance. He was finishing up wiping down the leg press when he noticed her. She appeared to be no older than 25. She had a tall, athletic build, her hair pulled back, and looked slightly out of place as if it were her first week at that gym. She lingered near the squat rack, clearly attempting to adjust the bar. This wasn't uncommon. Everyone begins somewhere. However, he then observed something else. Two men, likely in their mid to late 30s, white, wearing compression shirts that seemed unnecessary and displaying an unwarranted confidence. They were not exercising. They simply stood, resting on the preacher curl bench, observing her. Initially, the sounds were quiet, hushed whispers and slight chuckles. Then, one of them spoke, his voice carrying enough for many in the gym to hear. "Hey, sweetheart, that bar's heavier than you. Are you certain you don't need assistance?" The other responded with a loud, distinct laugh. She likely saw it on TikTok and believed she could simply enter and lift as a professional. Terrence paused, towel still in hand. His body tightened. He recognized that tone, sarcastic, yet with an underlying negativity. A combination of mockery and a sense of privilege. The kind that diminishes you without physical confrontation. The woman remained silent, continuously adjusting the bar, her gaze fixed forward. A subtle tremor ran through her hands. She inhaled deeply, as if suppressing something. Terrence surveyed the room. Approximately 15 people were present. Some had overheard something. He observed this by their reactions. A man wearing a red hoodie glanced at his phone, feigning disinterest. A woman near the ellipticals seemed uneasy, but remained silent. There was no movement, no vocalization. He settled onto a nearby bench, observing for a moment longer. Then, the realization struck him. This was bigger than just those two individuals and their inappropriate remarks. It concerned everyone present, including him, as they observed the event unfold and remained silent. Such incidents hadn't been uncommon in a location like this before. However, it may have been the first instance he found impossible to overlook. He rose deliberately, secured his water bottle, and approached. "Hey," he stated, his voice composed yet resolute. The two men turned. One displayed a smirk. "Talking to us?" The taller one questioned, raising his eyebrows. Terrence affirmed. "Do you find it amusing to harass someone while she's attempting to train?" The shorter one shrugged. "Relax, man. We were just joking," he said. "She didn't laugh," Terrence said, shifting his gaze towards the woman. She shook her head softly. Several heads now turned. A man pausing between sets looked up. A staff member behind the counter moved closer, listening. The taller man folded his arms. "Your father or something?" he asked. "No, t'es terrible. Just someone who's tired of people thinking this kind of thing is acceptable." A silence descended, thick and tense, yet he remained still. "Look, man," the shorter one began, his earlier confidence diminished. "We didn't intend any harm." Terrence acknowledged, "Yeah, that's the issue," but the room remained unresponsive. He sensed an underlying tension, a peculiar quietness born of people feigning ignorance of what they had clearly heard. A palpable tension filled the room, as if everyone was holding their breath, anticipating how much further it would escalate before someone intervened. That's the feeling at Ironworks. Terrence remained still, and so did the two men. The taller man, identified as Kyle by his bright blue gym badge, still wore a tight smirk, though his arms were now folded across his chest, a less overtly confident posture. The shorter man, Bryce, had taken a step back, as if uncertain if a confrontation was imminent. Terrence was not present to engage in a physical altercation. He didn't need to. His mere presence conveyed authority. And for a man like him, 40 years old, with 2 children and 2 decades of maintaining composure in tense situations, he had learned that sometimes remaining still could be the most impactful action. But he also observed something else. Still, few people intervened. Some glanced up, then looked back down as if they had mistakenly chosen the wrong performance and wished to change channels. Others appeared uneasy, seemingly hoping he would cease and move on, and it stung him. Not because he anticipated assistance, but because he understood how readily people could retreat behind their earbuds or phone screens when situations became complex. One man, likely in his mid-50s, sat on a bench pressing dumbbells. He shook his head, not at Kyle or Bryce, but at Terrence, as if he were the issue, as if speaking out was more troubling than the inappropriate comments being made initially. The young woman, who had been silent, now sat on the edge of the squat rack platform, pretending to tie her shoe, even though it was already secure. It was a way to keep occupied, a way to avoid looking at anyone. She wished she wasn't involved in this situation, but she already was. Terrence took a deliberate breath. He angled himself, just enough so his voice would reach everyone. You all heard what they said, and you observed how she reacted. He spoke, not yelling, but ensuring his voice carried throughout the room. If someone addressed your sister, your daughter, your friend in that manner, would you remain silent? Still, no response. Kyle appeared to be about to speak, as if he had a clever retort prepared. However, only a tense jaw and narrowed eyes were visible. Bryce moved again. Listen, man, nobody intends to provoke a conflict here. Terrence nodded, seeming to reconsider. Lauren, the gym manager, who was in her mid-30s with a blonde ponytail and a name tag, approached from behind the front desk. She moved deliberately, appearing somewhat apprehensive. It seemed she anticipated complaints and was carefully assessing the situation. Is everything okay here? She inquired, her gaze shifting between the men. Terrence responded, just clearing something up. Kyle interjected, this dude thinks he can tell us what to say to people now. Lauren observed him, then the woman who remained near the barbell. She understood, perhaps not immediately, but sufficiently. Well, she stated cautiously, we don't permit harassment here. If anyone feels disrespected, that is something we must address seriously. Bryce laughed dismissively. Harassment? He remarked. We said one thing, he added. Terrence interjected. That was enough. A silence followed. Then, Lauren slowly turned toward the young woman. Are you all right? She inquired. The woman rose, silent but composed. She stated she was only here to exercise. Lauren affirmed, understood. You are welcome here. Please inform us if you encounter any further issues. And that concluded the interaction. The atmosphere didn't ease with a significant event. There was no altercation, no theatrical display, no commendation. However, a change occurred. Bryce and Kyle shared a glance. Subsequently, without further conversation, they departed toward the locker room, speaking quietly to themselves. No one intervened. It wasn't necessary. Terrence turned and made eye contact with the woman. She offered him a slight nod, a gesture of thanks without speaking. More impactful than the interaction itself was the stillness, the expressions, and the way others seemed to shrink in that instant. He repeatedly considered what the outcome would have been if he hadn't been present. However, the day continued, and the narrative began to spread beyond the gym. Terrence was in the process of filling his water bottle at the fountain when he detected a voice coming from behind him. A sense of triumph seemed to fill him. He didn't turn around immediately. He recognized the voice. It was Kyle, that familiar mocking tone, now without a crowd, sounding less assertive, more intimate. Terrence quietly replaced the cap on his bottle before turning to face him. Kyle stood alone, his arms hanging loosely, the sharpness in his features softened, replaced by what appeared to be wounded pride. Perhaps embarrassment, maybe simply the annoyance of not having the final say. I'm not here to be a hero, Terrence stated. I came here to exercise, just like everyone else. Kyle moved nearer. You reacted excessively over a minor incident. She hadn't expressed any concerns. You intervened as if she required assistance. Terrence subtly supported himself against the wall, maintaining his composure. She didn't need rescuing, but she shouldn't have been ridiculed either. You deliberately made her feel uneasy. Kyle made a dismissive sound. So now you're the guardian of feelings. Terrence inclined his head. It was simply a grown man weary of witnessing individuals feigning acceptance of public displays of erratic behavior. Kyle's jaw tightened. You don't know me, and you don't know her, Terrence responded. But that didn't prevent him from speaking. There was a pause, a genuine one, where Kyle remained motionless, blinking, as if a portion of him wasn't accustomed to anyone challenging without shouting or striking. Just statements, simply a reflection. Then Kyle surveyed his surroundings. The hallway adjacent to the locker rooms was silent. Just them and a low hum of a treadmill belt nearby. You people always got to make it racial, he muttered. Terrence felt it. That shift, that old tired line, meant to flip the blame, meant to derail. He kept his voice steady. You brought race into it when you thought she was an easy target. You thought nobody would say anything. That's not on me. Kyle didn't answer. I've been in places like this all my life, Terrence went on, and I know when something's just a joke. When a situation arose involving asserting dominance, Terrence remained silent. Then Kyle exhaled sharply and mumbled, whatever, man. As he turned towards the locker room, Terrence observed him leave, then subtly shook his head. It wasn't a reaction of anger, nor of triumph, but of understanding. He had no desire to cause humiliation. He didn't require a public victory. The crucial aspect was that he had been heard, that Kyle, even if unwilling to acknowledge it, recognized it. And at that moment, a voice spoke behind him, quieter this time. It was the young woman. She had changed her shirt, with her hoodie pulled halfway over her head. Thank you, she said, her voice almost a whisper for saying something. Terrence gave a small smile. You're welcome. I didn't know what to do, she added. I just froze. That's okay, he said. You don't owe anyone a reaction. That's the thing nobody tells you. Sometimes just making it through moments like that is enough. She nodded. I'm Janelle, she said to Terrence. They shook hands. Do you come here often? She inquired, with a slight amusement at how predictable it seemed. 3 times a week, he stated, in the morning before work. She responded with a smile. It appears I will begin arriving early as well. Then, she proceeded towards the exit. There were no tears, no dramatic display of emotion. Simply a moment of quiet understanding between 2 individuals who now had a shared experience. However, as that phase concluded, another development had already begun to unfold beyond the gym's confines. By the time Terrence arrived home that evening, the children were already partially through dinner. Sonia, his wife, balanced a laptop on her knee while guiding their youngest through spelling homework, as was typical for a weekday. It reminded him that everyday life continues regardless of significant events that occurred earlier. However, the burden persisted as he entered. He attempted to shed it at the gym, to release it while driving. But such experiences don't always remain where they originate. They travel with you, subtly. How was the gym? Sonia inquired while serving mashed potatoes for their son, Caleb. Terrence paused. It was peculiar, actually, that prompted her to look up, her eyebrows raised. He recounted everything to her. He presented only the facts, without embellishment or exaggeration. What Kyle and Bryce had said, how no one intervened initially, and how he ultimately did. He described Janelle's reaction, the discomfort, and the ensuing silence. Sonia listened intently, chewing deliberately and maintaining eye contact. Upon his completion, she leaned back and released a breath through her nose. It's the typical situation, she remarked, not dismissively, but with a weary tone, a recognizable tiredness. I understand, Terrence responded. However, something about today felt different. Do you mean the fact that you were the sole person to comment? She inquired. Yes, that, and he hesitated. I observed how many people listened and remained silent. Because that's often the way things unfold, she stated, rising to rinse a plate. People avoid involvement. They desire to prevent uncomfortable moments. They're apprehensive about speaking up and becoming entangled. Some believe it's not their concern. He nodded slowly. It shouldn't be typical, he thought. It shouldn't, she replied in agreement. However, it was later that night, after the children were asleep and the house was still when Terrence checked his phone. Alerts appeared from a local Facebook group he followed, Knoxville Fit Life Community. A post detailed the event. Saw something crazy at Ironworks today. A man stood up for a woman being teased by two guys at the squat rack. There was no violence, just a direct challenge, which is commendable. The post already had over 100 comments. Some users expressed praise for the individual. Others inquired about the situation. A few responded with predictable reactions. The complete details are unknown. It seems people are easily offended these days. Humor is no longer tolerated. Terrence did not participate in the discussion. He simply observed it unfold. A short clip was even posted, a shaky, 3-second phone video showing him standing in front of Kyle and Bryce, his back to the camera. A still image depicts a man steadfastly remaining in place. He felt uncomfortable being the focus of attention, not due to shame, but because it diverted focus from the core message. The intention was for the discussion to highlight how easily inappropriate actions can go unnoticed if no one speaks up. The following morning at the gym, the atmosphere had shifted. Janelle was present again. This time, she offered him a fist bump, her face displaying a friendly smile as if they had been gym companions for years. People observed without negativity. Several individuals nodded in his direction, a gesture of understanding rather than attention-seeking. Lauren, the gym manager, approached him discreetly once he concluded a set. "Hey," she began, "thank you again for yesterday." He turned to face her. "We're experienced previous difficulties," she explained, with people voicing sentiments they perceive as benign. This time, discussions are occurring about it. Perhaps it will bring about a change. Maybe, he responded. Just as he reached for his towel, a man from the back, appearing to be in his mid-60s, with a wiry build and gray in his beard, approached. "I was here yesterday," he stated. Terrence raised an eyebrow. "Yes," the man confirmed. He paused, then added, "I didn't say anything then. Should have. I have 2 granddaughters. I often think if that were one of them, I want someone like you close by." Terrence remained silent for a moment. Then the man offered a half smile and said, "Appreciate that. My name's Roland. If you ever need a place to stay, I'm around." Terrence hadn't anticipated who would enter next, and the words he would speak. Terrence hadn't expected anyone in particular when the gym doors opened late that Friday afternoon. But there he was, Bryce. No caile, no savagir, no smirk. Just a man walking in with headphones around his neck and something in his eyes that hadn't been there previously. Terrence noticed him the moment he entered. He was uncertain whether Bryce would disregard him, attempt a confrontation, or act as if the previous day hadn't occurred. However, Bryce did not feign indifference. Instead, he approached Terrence directly after he completed his warm-up set on the lat pull-down machine. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than it had been previously. "Do you have a minute?" Terrence hesitated before responding. He maintained his grip on the machine's handle, carefully observing Bryce's expression for any indication of mockery. He detected none. "All right," Terrence finally said. Bryce shifted his weight, restless. "I spoke with Kyle," he started. "He believes you intentionally embarrassed us. He's still upset, but—" Terrence remained silent. "I have 2 sons," Bryce continued, aged 10 and 8. "They were at the park recently. I observe an older boy teasing them. Nothing serious, just provoking them. And I understood. I felt paralyzed. I didn't know how to react. I simply watched." He hesitated. "I recalled my silence during that incident with the girl. We were certainly behaving poorly, and Terrence observed it." "Now what?" "You were right," Bryce stated, his gaze unwavering. "I don't want to be that person, not for my children and not for my own sake." Terrence shifted back a little. "It's not about being correct. It's about recognizing when to cease being the individual you'd avoid encountering." Bryce affirmed. They stood in silence for a moment. Just 2 men in gym clothes, under fluorescent lights, speaking as if the conversation held significance. "I'm not going to apologize for Kyle," Bryce stated. "He's got his own things to sort out. But I do apologize for my words, for my behavior." Terrence extended his hand. "I accept that," they said, shaking hands firmly, briefly, genuinely. Later that evening, Terrence sat on the porch with his daughter, Elise, who just turned 14 and had recently taken an interest in running. She inquired about what occurred at the gym. She remembered hearing her mom briefly mention something earlier. He paused, then recounted the events. He presented the information directly, without minimizing its impact. He described the conversation, the quiet moments, the disagreement, and the subsequent apology. He observed her reaction as he spoke, noting the shifts in her expression with each detail. "So you simply spoke with them?" She questioned, lifting her eyebrows. "Yes," he replied. "I didn't raise my voice. I didn't create a disturbance. I simply asked them why they believed that type of conduct was acceptable. Did that have an effect? It didn't produce immediate changes, but perhaps it prompted reflection. That's frequently how shifts begin." Elise glanced at her sneakers, fiddling with the laces. "I'm not sure I would have the courage to say something like that," she whispered. Terrence smiled. "The interesting aspect is you don't feel courageous when you do it. You simply feel that someone needs to." She looked up at him, her eyes gentle, yet containing something else now. "Perhaps pride." "I will try," she said softly. "You don't need to do anything special," he responded. "Just pay attention. When something doesn't feel right, don't ignore it. Speak up if you can, or be there for someone who can't." They sat in silence for a while afterward. There was no need to fill the space, just the kind of silence that felt substantial instead of vacant. But Monday was approaching, and someone unexpected still had something to say before this story would feel complete. Monday morning began as any other. Terrence parked his usual spot, swiped his gym card at the front desk, and proceeded to the free weights. He anticipated a routine start to the week, nothing out of the ordinary. Then he noticed him. Roland, the older man who had spoken to him a few days prior, was positioned by the dumbbell rack, stretching his shoulders as if preparing for an extensive set. However, today he wasn't in workout clothes. He wore jeans, boots, and a dark jacket zipped up halfway. He wasn't here to train. He was waiting. "Got a minute?" Roland inquired, glancing up as Terrence neared. Terrence affirmed, and they walked towards the small lounge area near the vending machines. The gym was still, and few noticed them. Roland clasped his hands together, appearing hesitant. "I've been considering what occurred," he finally stated. "What you did, what you said." Terrence remained silent. Roland added, "I'm 66. I've witnessed a great deal in my years. I spent my childhood in Ohio during the 60s. My father owned a tire shop. We weren't wealthy, but we managed. I recall the time the schools integrated. I remember the underlying stress. However, we never discussed it at home." He paused. "And because of that lack of discussion, I felt unprepared when difficult situations arose. I would witness events, both at work and around town, and would tell myself, well, that's not my concern, believing silence equated to neutrality. It became clear later that it was not the case." Terrence listened, remaining silent. Roland's voice lowered a little. "The day you spoke to those men, I was present. I was 2 benches away. I heard everything." Terrence nodded slowly, "And I assumed you noticed. I felt compelled to intervene. I truly did, but I couldn't speak. I remained motionless." He reacted with a shake of his head, "And I'm still regretting it." Terrence moved closer. "You are here now. That has value." Roland exhaled. "I have grandchildren, 2 girls and 1 boy. The girls are of mixed heritage. My daughter married a black man, a good guy who teaches 6th grade. I often think about them. If they had been in that gym and someone had spoken to them in that manner, I would want someone like Terrence present, someone who wouldn't remain silent." The room felt different now, not negatively, simply more substantial. "I've expressed sentiments in the past that I regret," Roland admitted. "I've allowed certain things to go unaddressed that I shouldn't have, but I am striving to improve. That's why I came today, to offer my gratitude, and to assure you that I will speak up in the future." No more hesitation. Terrence finally smiled. That meant more than you probably realize. They shook hands again. This one felt different. Not a gesture of thanks, but a recognition of a new understanding. "I might even start working out again," Roland added with a chuckle. Terrence grinned. "Start with light weights. Don't go breaking something." They both laughed, and the tension in the air finally eased. Following Roland's departure, Terrence stood near the mirror wall, a towel draped over his shoulder, and observed the room for a brief moment. It was the same gym with the same walls. Yet, it felt altered, not due to any sudden improvement in everyone's abilities, nor because of the eradication of racism, but because of a subtle change. One person spoke, another listened, a third reconsidered their perspective. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it represented a difference. And sometimes, a small difference is enough to initiate progress. Even with everything, the true understanding didn't come until Terrence saw what his daughter posted later that night. It was approximately 9:30 when Terrence finally sat down on the edge of his bed. Shoes kicked off, lights dimmed, the soft hum of the hallway fan in the background. Sonia was reading, legs curled under the blanket, her glasses sliding down her nose. He grabbed his phone to check a few messages before bed, and that's when he saw a new post from Elise. He clicked. It was a selfie. An ordinary picture, her hair pulled back, no filter, wearing her school hoodie. But it was the caption that stopped him. My dad stood up for a stranger this week. He didn't yell, he didn't throw hands, he just spoke up. And that was enough to make people think, including me. I used to believe keeping quiet made you neutral, but I was wrong. Silence has side. I hope I'm brave like him when it matters. Terrence stared at the screen, not because he was surprised by the message, but because it was so confident and direct. It had come from his teenage daughter, the one who used to feel anxious requesting ketchup from a server, the one who once cried when she had to recite a poem in front of her class. And now she was sharing words like that publicly. He glanced at Sonia and gave her the phone. She read it quietly, then smiled without looking up. You seem to notice she's observing your actions, don't you? Terrence sighed. I'm mostly just attempting to make it through the week. She responded, setting the phone down on the nightstand. You're managing better than that. He reclined, gazing at the ceiling, allowing the feeling to linger. Everything that transpired in the last few days, Kyle, Bryce, Janelle, Roland, Elise, all began with a single choice. Not a significant one, not a sensational one. Simply a decision to speak instead of remaining silent. That was all. That recollection remained with him profoundly. People often assume that taking a stand requires fearlessness, but that isn't the reality. Frequently, one experiences fear and doubt. There's a reluctance to create awkwardness. Yet, remaining silent has consequences for others. He recalled Janelle's expression when she described feeling paralyzed. He remembered Roland's nervous habit of rubbing his hands together as he confessed his uncertainty about what to do. He recalled Bryce struggling to express regret without appearing vulnerable. And he mused, this is the beginning. Not with elaborate pronouncements, not with online condemnation, but in tangible locations with genuine individuals who opt for the somewhat more challenging course of action. The subsequent morning, Terrence paused in his vehicle within the gym parking lot prior to entering, not to prepare himself, simply to contemplate. Afterward, he retrieved his phone and composed a message. It wasn't intended for widespread dissemination. The goal wasn't validation, it was simply sharing a truth. Significant impact doesn't require a grand gesture. It involves acknowledging injustice and speaking out, regardless of fear or isolation. That's where progress begins. He published the message and exited the vehicle. It was another Monday, another workout, but with a feeling of lightness he hadn't experienced previously. Many people have experienced moments similar to those described. If you've hesitated in the past, remember you have future opportunities. The important consideration is, in those future instances, how will you respond? Speak out, even when it causes discomfort, even if the matter seems minor. Because remaining silent may preserve your ease, but it won't safeguard another's dignity. And someone close to you may be awaiting a voice such as yours. Should this story have struck a chord, please share it and leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe, as we have additional stories exploring the true meaning of doing what's right. According to my mom, she works at NASA. The entire class laughed until someone with a badge entered the room and altered the atmosphere. It was a Tuesday, shortly after recess, and the classroom had a subtle scent of hand sanitizer and pencil shavings. Ms. Lawson had just finished roll call when she clapped her hands and announced, "All right, it's time for our What My Parent Does presentations. One after another, students share their stories. A father who worked as a firefighter, a mother employed a local bakery, a brother serving in the army who was acknowledged with a round of applause, even though technically he didn't count. Next came Talia Jefferson's introduction. She rose deliberately, clutching a small index card displaying her name in purple ink. Talia was known as one of the quieter students in class. She was intelligent but preferred not to raise her hand simply to speak. She surveyed the room, making no direct eye contact, and stated distinctly, "My mom works at NASA." A pause followed. Then came quiet chuckles, escalating into laughter, not a sudden outburst, but a wave that grew stronger as confused and amused glances circulated. "Wait, NASA?" Someone called from the rear. "You mean like the space agency?" Another voice whispered, perhaps a little too loudly. Even Ms. Lawson seemed surprised. She didn't laugh. Instead, her eyebrows rose a little, as if she found it difficult to accept. Talia blinked deliberately, remaining silent and still. She didn't shout. She didn't flee. She simply stood, her expression composed, her hands unwavering. "Yes," she confirmed, stating that she works at NASA and is a systems engineer. The word seemed out of place. Ms. Lawson, positioned close to the board, offered a strained smile, signaling a transition to the next item. "Well, thank you, Talia," she said, already looking over her clipboard. Next, it was Owen's turn. Talia resumed her seat, disregarding the laughter and the subtle gestures. Her fingers tightened around the bottom of her shirt. Her expression remained composed, though her cheeks felt flushed. Owen began to discuss his dad's plumbing business, but Talia registered very little of what he said. She was certain they didn't accept her story, not a single one of them, not even the teacher. They found the task unbelievable, but even more so, they doubted the individual presenting it. A girl with deep brown skin, her tight braids secured with a soft pink scrunchie. She carried a hand-me-down backpack with a broken zipper. Her shoes were well worn, and she didn't use elaborate language or speak with great volume. Therefore, when she mentioned NASA, it sounded to them like a fantasy, like a game. During Owen's presentation, a piece of paper was passed to her desk. A boy named Theo leaned towards her and asked if she cleaned the bathrooms or something. Talia remained silent. She didn't cry, not at that moment. As the bell signaled the end of class and students scrambled for their backpacks, she remained seated, her gaze fixed on the classroom door. She had never before wished her mom held a different position, one that was simpler to discuss, one that didn't invite curious glances. Nevertheless, even then, she held onto the conviction that it was important. Her mom had once shared with her that some truths are too profound for limited understanding. One simply allows them to mature. Talia exited that classroom with her head held high, despite a knot in her stomach. She felt no personal shame. Her concern was for those around her. However, she was unaware that the learning experience wasn't complete. This applied to her classmates and to Ms. Lawson as well. The Jefferson house was located close to a peaceful road in Mobile, Alabama. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was neat, painted a light yellow with green shutters. It was the sort of place where the porch light was consistently illuminated before nightfall, and the screen door made a slight creak upon entry. Talia entered through that door at a slower pace than normal. Removing her sneakers, she dropped her backpack close to the staircase and went directly to the kitchen. The aroma of garlic and onions indicated her mom had arrived home earlier than usual. Dr. Renee Jefferson was at the stove, stirring something in a large red pot. She didn't immediately acknowledge her. "You're late," she stated, not unkindly, simply observing it. Talia selected a chair and sat down. "Had to remain behind to clean the desks," she murmured. Renee turned, observed her daughter's expression, and adjusted the flame. Talia remained silent for a moment. Her hands rested in her lap, nervously playing with the sleeves of her hoodie. She appeared eager to speak, but struggled to begin. "We laughed," Talia said at last. Renee understood immediately who she meant. She drew out the chair opposite her daughter and sat. There were no outbursts, no displays of shock or fear. "Why? I informed them that you were employed at NASA. Renee gave a barely perceptible nod, and they didn't believe you. One kid suggested you might have cleaned the bathrooms. Renee took a shallow breath, a momentary pause to compose herself. And what was your response? You didn't offer one. Ms. Lawson quickly moved on, seemingly avoiding the issue. That action caused Renee's eyebrows to twitch almost imperceptibly, but she maintained a level tone. Do you think you said something incorrect? Talia glanced up sharply. No. Don't accept their lack of understanding as your fault. They laughed, and that's their responsibility, not yours. A moment of silence followed as the bubbling from the pot filled the space. Outside, a dog barked twice and then stopped. You know, Renee said, rising to stir the food again, when I first told people I wanted to work in aerospace, my high school guidance counselor told me to be more realistic. Said I should consider secretarial work. Talia looked up, eyes wide. That occurred in 1998. I didn't engage in an argument with her. I simply ceased visiting her office. Did it cause pain? Renee extinguished the stove and turned to her daughter. Yes, but also ignited a spark. I wasn't feeling anger towards her. I was resolved not to allow her to dictate who I could be. Talia smiled. Just a little. She appreciated that her mom consistently found a way to speak honestly, but not in a sensationalized way. There was resilience in her composure. You know, I could attend your class, Renee mentioned casually. Parent days are this Friday, correct? Talia blinked. You do that? She asked. I get the day off anyway, and it might be fun. Renee replied, but what would you wear? Talia's eyes lit up. Renee grinned. I was thinking maybe my NASA badge and that black blazer you hate. Talia responded, okay, yeah, do that. They both laughed then, a real, from-the-belly kind of laughter. The air in the kitchen felt lighter. Renee served them both bowls of stew and set them on the table. While they ate, she shared stories with Talia about her first job interview and the time she accidentally spilled coffee on a flight simulator keyboard. The stories made Talia giggle, and she no longer felt small. She felt lucky. Remember, Renee said as they finished, you don't owe anyone proof. But if the moment comes when you feel like showing them, just know I've got your back. Talia nodded slowly, cheeks full of food and her badge. Renee smirked that too. She wasn't intending to simply make a statement. She aimed to transform the atmosphere of the room. Talia hadn't realized this yet. Friday arrived sooner than Talia anticipated. Throughout the entire week, rumors continued to circulate within the classroom, much like dust in sunlight. Several students attempted apologies through hesitant gestures. One offered her a crushed fruit snack. Another quietly said, I was just joking. However, the majority behaved as if nothing had occurred. This suited Talia just fine. She hadn't forgotten. As the morning bell signaled the start of the day, the classroom was filled with excited energy. Ms. Lawson had organized the desks in a horseshoe shape, creating space for parents to be seated and present. She wore a purple blouse and had placed a tray of sugar cookies, clearly purchased from a grocery store, as a somewhat feeble attempt to create a celebratory atmosphere. Talia was positioned near the center, her backpack carefully placed beneath her chair. She felt anxious, though not frightened. It was a feeling of anticipation. She had not informed anyone that her mom would be present. The first parents arrived approximately at 9:15. This included a man wearing a mechanic's uniform, a woman in scrubs, and several moms carrying tote bags and Starbucks cups, who greeted with somewhat overenthusiastic smiles and waves. The presentation commenced, punctuated by applause and gentle laughter. One dad shared a story about repairing a sink that had unexpectedly burst. Another mom recounted her experience of teaching yoga to toddlers. Talia repeatedly looked toward the door. Precisely as Ms. Lawson began introducing the subsequent speaker, the door opened. Dr. Renee Jefferson entered the room. She was wearing the black blazer that Talia found so off-putting, perfectly tailored and crisp. Her NASA Johnson Space Center identification badge hung from a Navy lanyard, paired with black slacks and no jewelry except for a silver watch. Her expression was calm, not smug, not flashy, simply present. The room fell silent instantly. Even the air seemed to still. Ms. Lawson stammered, and Talia stood up, announcing, "This is my mom, Dr. Renee Jefferson." The teacher's eyes widened momentarily before a smile spread across their face. All right, welcome. They gestured. Would you like to tell us about your work? Renee responded with a courteous nod. Certainly. Good morning, everyone. I'm an aerospace systems engineer at NASA. I work on mission planning, flight systems integration, and operation strategy for our lunar and Mars programs. Several heads turned in the direction of Talia. A few mouths dropped open, and one student quietly whispered, "Whoa." Renee proceeded calmly. Her voice had a measured cadence, clear, smooth, and steady. A significant portion of my work focuses on designing systems that ensure astronauts can travel safely in space. We examine all aspects, from their respiration to the transmission of data back to Earth. She paused, allowing the statement to sink in. I'm not here to impress you, she added, observing the room. I came here because my daughter mentioned she's spoken with you, and some of you expressed doubt about my work. Silence. Talia could hear her own heartbeat. She refused to blink. Renee approached the whiteboard and indicated a printed diagram she had prepared, a genuine schematic from a previous project. You don't need to grasp every detail. That's perfectly acceptable, she stated, addressing the group. But the next time you hear something that seems unbelievable, pause before dismissing it. Because innovation can emerge unexpectedly, she said, then turned to her daughter. And when someone shares a truth with conviction, allow it to remain as it is, don't diminish it. Ms. Lawson cleared her throat. Thank you, Dr. Jefferson. That was very enlightening. Renee smiled and walked over to sit beside Talia, who was trying not to grin. The room proceeded slowly after that. The next parent began their presentation about running a car dealership. There was no laughter, no whispering. And Talia, she sat up straighter than she ever had before. She didn't look around for affirmation. She didn't require it. At that moment, her truth resonated strongly, accessible to all present. However, many failed to recognize that the woman they had just encountered hadn't always experienced being heard. Her journey to NASA encompassed countless instances mirroring this one. Prior to becoming Dr. Renee Jefferson, she was simply Renee Lewis, a slender teenager with oversized glasses and notebooks filled with diagrams that held no interest for anyone else in her neighborhood. Growing up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, she lived in a house with a sagging front porch, raised by a mother who worked 2 jobs to pay the bills. From a young age, she preferred machines to makeup. While other girls enjoyed playing jump rope, Renee constructed small devices from discarded fans and obsolete cassette players. Her uncle once described her as odd, but she viewed that as a positive attribute. At 13, she borrowed a book from the public library about space shuttles and devoured it completely in a single night. By 14, she was independently learning fundamental programming concepts. She rarely discussed this at school. She quickly discovered that expressing a desire to work at NASA would often result in ridicule or dismissal. Her educators didn't encourage her. This wasn't due to a lack of intelligence. Renee consistently earned straight A's across all subjects. Instead, they had formed preconceived notions about her future. You'd be exceptionally organized, one counselor remarked to her. You'd excel as a receptionist. Upon mentioning her intention to apply to a summer program for young engineers at Georgia Tech, her math teacher expressed surprise. He remarked that it was highly competitive and questioned if she was certain about spending the application fee. Despite this, she submitted her application and was accepted. That summer proved transformative. She found herself among peers who approached problem solving in a similar manner, with notebooks brimming with questions and uninhibited curiosity. She returned with a collection of blueprints and a newfound sense of purpose. College presented its own challenges. At Auburn University, she found herself one of just 3 black women within the entire engineering department. During collaborative assignments, she frequently was asked to record notes rather than work on calculations. Instructors continued to mispronounce her name, even after 3 semesters had passed. Despite these difficulties, she remained steadfast, consistently attending classes. Renee supported herself by working evenings at a diner close to campus and providing tutoring services to high school students on weekends. There were moments when she contemplated abandoning her studies. It wasn't a matter of her inability to manage the workload. The difficulties stemmed from the draining effort of constantly having to demonstrate her place. During one spring, following a successful thermodynamics midterm, she overheard two classmates speaking privately behind her. One suggested she must have received assistance, and the other speculated she may have copied from another student. Instead of confronting them, she didn't shed tears. She simply returned home, opened her textbook, and began preparing for the upcoming finals. By the semester's conclusion, she achieved the top rank within her department. It was an unspoken understanding amongst them, but they recognized it. Following graduation, she completed an internship at Lockheed Martin. Subsequently, she submitted an application to NASA, which she considered a long shot. However, her qualifications were undeniable. The acceptance call arrived in March while she was in a laundromat, surrounded by wet towels and with only one dryer operational. Her mother wept on the phone for a full 5 minutes. From there, the substantial effort commenced. The meetings, the designs, the late nights, the subtle glances in conference rooms, the moments where she had to repeat herself 3 times to be heard. But she persisted in voicing her thoughts, because whenever she worked at a console or drafted a fresh concept, she recalled a younger version of herself who only needed one person to believe it was achievable. Now, as she entered her daughter's 5th grade classroom, the badge swaying from her neck, she represented more than just herself. She stood for every girl who had ever been told, "People like you don't do that." However, this wasn't about proving a point anymore. It was about establishing something new in her daughter, a foundation that couldn't be undermined. The following Monday, subtle changes were noticeable, not in a dramatic fashion, but through small shifts. The shift was subtle, something you'd only perceive if you were paying close attention. When Talia entered class, she anticipated no special welcome, and none arrived, but the atmosphere felt different. People didn't visibly react when she spoke. Theo didn't whisper. In fact, he completely avoided looking at her. During recess, 2 girls, Kennedy and Samira, approached her near the jungle gym. They stood nearby, uncomfortably, shifting their weight. "My mom said your mom's speech was really something," Kennedy said, chewing her bottom lip. "She seemed intelligent, genuinely so." "She is," Talia answered promptly. Samira concurred. "I researched NASA after school," she explained. "It's quite interesting." That was their brief exchange. Yet they remained. And for the first time all year, the 3 of them settled on the bench and discussed a topic beyond snack trades or slime videos. Later that day, Ms. Lawson spoke privately with Talia as the class prepared to leave. "I wanted to say something," she began, her voice softer than normal. Regarding last week, Talia looked up, attentive. "I should have managed that situation differently," Ms. Lawson continued. "I ought to have asked more questions rather than proceeding so quickly. I apologize." Talia wasn't certain how to respond. She rarely encountered adults offering apologies in that manner. She nodded once, deliberately. That was sufficient for the present, though not everyone experienced a change of perspective. Certain children still spoke in hushed tones, but they did so with greater discretion. Some observed her with an expectation of failure, seemingly needing her to falter to reaffirm their own perspectives. One boy, Dean, would quietly say NASA kid whenever she passed, as if attempting to diminish her accomplishments. Talia remained composed. She did not react defensively or retreat. Instead, she continued her efforts. She engaged more frequently in class, volunteering answers even when uncertain of the correctness. Now, even making mistakes didn't intimidate her, not as it once had. One afternoon during group work, she overheard a classmate say, "She thinks she's better than us." Talia looked up calmly and replied, "No, I just know I belong here." No further debate followed. At home, Renee observed the change as well. Talia spoke more at dinner, sharing small details about her day without needing to be prompted repeatedly. And she began drawing again, shifting away from cartoons towards diagrams, similar to those her mother created. Rockets, helmets, star maps, and pencil. One evening, Renee discovered a post-it note affixed to the fridge. It stated, "I'm going to work there too, love, Talia." She left it untouched for 3 days. However, this wasn't solely about demonstrating assurance. A more profound shift had occurred within Talia. It was no longer a matter of disproving anyone. It was about embracing her own authenticity, recognizing truth regardless of criticism. During gym class, when the teacher requested they write down a goal not related to sports, Talia wrote, "Engineer, space missions just like my mom." When the teacher announced it, there were no laughs. The class simply listened. However, at home, a different feeling arose. It was a still moment shared between mother and daughter, solidifying all they had experienced. It was Friday night again. A full week had passed since Parent Day, and the house was filled with the aroma of Renee's renowned lemon chicken. Talia sat at the kitchen table, sketching a new design, a rotating satellite with solar panels shaped like flower petals. She worked quietly, pausing occasionally to erase or examine an angle. Renee watched from the sink, carefully drying a dish. The focused way her daughter drew, with her tongue slightly pressed against her upper lip, brought back memories of herself at 12, always constructing something in her mind. "Would you like to take a break?" Renee asked softly. Talia looked up. "Almost finished." Renee smiled, resting against the counter. "You've been working on that for 2 hours." Talia replied, "I know, I just wanted to look right." She completed the final line and showed the paper to her mom. Renee approached and examined it closely. "Explain it to me." Talia said, "Well, it's a satellite, but instead of keeping all the panels flat, they open up like this." She demonstrated the shape with her hands. "So it can collect more energy when it turns, depending on the angle of the sun." Renee acknowledged with a nod, clearly impressed. "That's a clever approach. Where did that idea originate?" Talia replied, "I'm not entirely sure. I had been considering sunflowers earlier, observing how they track the sun's movement. The concept simply arose." Renee took a seat next to her, carefully placing the paper on the table. "You know what I appreciate most about that idea?" She inquired. "What?" Renee responded. "You weren't attempting to make a favorable impression. You were simply striving to resolve an issue." Talia glanced at the drawing once more. "Yes, I suppose so." They remained there for a moment in quiet contemplation. A comfortable silence settled. Then Talia spoke again, her voice gentler. "Do you think they truly believed me?" "After you left," Renee placed her hand on the table. "Some did, some still don't. That's not something you can always manage. So what is the solution? You continue to reappear. That's the challenging aspect. Not a single time, but repeatedly. You articulate the truth, even when it seems as though nobody listens." Talia considered that as you did. Renee offered a gentle smile, similar to the one I still offer. "Was it always this difficult for you?" Renee reclined in the chair, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes more so, but I stopped expecting it to become simple." Talia regarded her mother, seeing her not only as a parent, but as an individual. Someone who had overcome obstacles she hadn't even been aware of. Someone who possessed quiet strength without needing external validation. "I used to wish you had a conventional job." Renee laughed, something straightforward to describe. Talia observed her mother's reaction, recognizing the discomfort when people inquired. "Now, I find it quite admirable, truly admirable." Renee reached out and gently tucked one of her daughter's braids behind her ear. "I'm proud of you, she said. Not because of what you said in class, but because you said it anyway." Talia felt a warmth in her chest, not just pride, but relief. A weight she hadn't noticed until it started to lift. "I didn't think you were going to come that day," she admitted. Renee raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" she asked. "I thought maybe you'd think it wasn't worth it." Renee hesitated. Then she moved nearer, speaking with a resolute and unwavering tone. "Anything that impacts your self-perception is always deserving of support." Little needed to be said after that. Talia rose and proceeded to the refrigerator, took a magnet, and attached her artwork directly beside the grocery list. Renee observed her, feeling a sense of quiet contentment. Not every learning experience warranted recognition. Some simply existed, perceptible only to those who had rightfully gained them. There remained one final point to share, not directed at Talia, but for those still discovering what excellence resembles. The following week, during the morning announcements, Ms. Lawson took an unanticipated action. She presented a student submission from the Career Dreams bulletin board and read it aloud to the class. "This one is from Talia Jefferson," she announced. She wrote, "I want to build machines that will reach places no person has ever reached because someone must discover how to get us there, and I believe I can." There was no laughter this time, only silence. Several students turned to observe her, not with incredulity, but with something approaching respect. Talia sat at her desk, serene and concentrated, sketching miniature gears in the borders of her notebook. She didn't require a glance upward, nor did she need the room to applaud. That wasn't the focus, as this narrative was never centered on recognition. It concerned honesty, about maintaining conviction when others expressed doubt, about the significance of speaking clearly, not noisily. However, the individuals in that classroom had observed something unexpected. A woman with qualifications, certainly. Beyond that, she was a woman with a clear sense of self, someone who didn't require authorization to express herself, and a daughter who witnessed her interspaces devoid of faith and yet infused them with strength. Renee didn't need to speak loudly. She didn't need to detail her achievements. Her presence was sufficient. However, it was Talia who bore the burden of that day. She endured the flames of mockery, remained within them, and emerged stronger. It can be challenging to express self-belief, particularly when facing a lack of external validation. The core message extends beyond the nature of a parent's profession or the perceived grandeur of their role. It centers on the lessons we impart to our children, not through spoken words, but through demonstrable actions. Affirming your child instills resilience. Consistently supporting them cultivates bravery. Even a brief moment in a crowded room, standing near them, demonstrates what it truly means to be heard. When a child experiences being seen, not only by a teacher or a classmate, but by the wider world, they cease to diminish their presence. They stop doubting themselves. They begin to carry themselves with the confidence of someone who has something significant to contribute. Because they do. Talia no longer needed to persuade anyone. She wasn't waiting for the class to accept her. She had already moved forward, now concentrating on what she thought achievable. This is what makes narratives like hers significant. Because for each child who has been ridiculed, overlooked, or interrupted, there's another opportunity awaiting. A moment when the door opens, when the badge is displayed, when silence transforms into respect, and it remains with them. At the conclusion of the school year, when the class created their memory book, a page was designated most likely to. Beneath Talia's photograph, a message read, seemingly with the intention of sending something into space. She reacted with a smile, not due to the coolness of the statement, but because this time it appeared to be genuine. Therefore, the next time a child expresses a significant aspiration, refrain from immediate skepticism. Avoid limiting their potential to your current understanding. Allow them to surpass your expectations. And for parents observing this, be present, even when it feels challenging, particularly when it's truly important. Vocalize your belief in them. For more stories like this, please subscribe. These are stories that highlight true strength. Judge Holbrook and those present in the courtroom initially believed she was merely a disoriented elderly woman. However, she quietly presented her bar card and systematically refuted the case before their eyes. Do you comprehend the charges against you? Or should we proceed more deliberately? Judge Morris Holbrook's tone held a barely concealed hint of amusement. He reclined in his high-backed chair, folded his arms, and looked down at the elderly woman standing alone at the defense table. His voice held the same condescension he directed at blustering defendants who believed they could best him in argument. However, this wasn't a volatile young person with loose trousers and a defiant manner. This was a 72-year-old woman wearing a pale blue cardigan and sturdy orthopedic shoes, standing upright with her hands softly clasped over a well-worn leather handbag. Alma Vernice Whitaker faced charges of obstruction, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest stemming from a protest 2 weeks prior at Bakersfield City Hall. Leland Drury, the prosecutor, appeared to be no older than 30, presenting a polished image with shiny shoes and a demeanor suggesting unwavering self-assurance. He briefly looked towards the gallery, a slight grin on his face. A few individuals in the courtroom suppressed quiet laughter. The bailiff emitted a chuckle. A flicker moved across the stenographer's lips. Alma remained silent. Judge Holbrook struck the file before him. The document stated that he had pushed an officer and incited the crowd to defy orders to leave. Such bold claims from a person of his stature. A fresh ripple of laughter spread through the room. The judge peered over his spectacles towards her. He noted the absence of legal counsel. No attorney, I presume? She then spoke, her voice calm and measured. No, Your Honor, Alma replied, a statement that visibly startled Leland. His head angled as if he hadn't understood. Madam, are you aware this is a criminal proceeding? You are facing genuine charges. Alma did not react. I am fully aware. Would you like to see my bar card? A moment of silence followed. Then some laughter arose, people assuming she meant something else. However, Alma slowly reached into her handbag and produced a laminated card, somewhat yellowed around the edges. She positioned it carefully on the table and pushed it across. Albrook peered, then leaned in. It displayed State Bar of California. Attorney Alma V. Whitaker, bar number 129804, was admitted on June 17, 1983. The room fell silent. She looked up and adjusted her reading glasses. I received my law degree from Howard in 1982, passed the bar the following summer, spent 12 years as a public defender in Detroit, and another 8 years working civil rights cases here in California, she stated. No one moved. I retired in 2003, she added, but I have kept my license active just in case. Judge Albrook shifted in his seat. Drury cleared his throat, but said nothing. Alma addressed the judge directly. Before this courtroom determines my fate, I need to clarify some information. I was not organizing a protest. I was attempting to de-escalate it. There is a distinction, and I plan to demonstrate it. Point by point, her tone remained consistent. She did not increase her volume, but each word appeared deliberate and considered. The bailiff looked towards the judge. Albrook examined her bar card once more, flipping it over, seeming to anticipate it might disintegrate. Alma remained motionless, as if she had held that posture countless times, and she had. Leland Drury then spoke, his voice slightly strained. Your Honor, we cannot confirm this without official. It's authentic, and I have additional documentation in this bag if needed, Alma stated, interrupting. Drury stopped speaking. Judge Albrook paused, then concluded very well. The court acknowledges the defendant is representing herself. He then paused. A subtle murmur, a sense of bewilderment, rippled through the gallery. But Alma Whitaker offered only a slight, almost unnoticeable acknowledgement to herself. Her purpose wasn't to provide amusement. It was to underscore that appearances could be deceiving. However, Judge Albrook wasn't prepared for the revelation she was about to unveil. The courtroom still hadn't fully settled. Judge Albrook now sat with a more upright posture, observing Alma Whitaker with a different kind of focus, one devoid of irony. Leland Drury, who previously appeared relaxed, now seemed uncertain whether he's entered a genuine trial or a trap. His jaw was tight, but his eyes repeatedly looked at the judge as if anticipating support. Alma made adjustments to the microphone before her. I'd like to begin by addressing the prosecution's claims, beginning with the body cam footage. Or more specifically, the lack of it, Leland said. Your Honor, the official report indicates the footage from Officer Grunwald's body camera was deemed irrelevant because of a battery malfunction. This malfunction occurred precisely from the moment the officers arrived at the protest until I was placed in cuffs. She turned slightly toward the jury. It's a significant gap in the record, isn't it? She moved slowly, considering her words, much like lawyers sometimes do. However, this wasn't a performance, it was a genuine issue. According to the arrest report, 3 officers were involved, she stated. Only one officer's body camera footage was examined. The second one had malfunctioned, and the third officer's footage was, what did the report indicate? It wasn't uploaded due to an administrative error. She paused before the jury box and folded her hands. However, The report did include complete transcripts of what I purportedly said, without any accompanying audio. Judge Hallbrook turned to Drury. Mr. Drury, is that an accurate representation? Drury cleared his throat. We presented the available materials, Your Honor. The lack of video recording does not invalidate the officer's testimony under oath. Alma didn't wait. Then we should discuss that testimony. Officer Grunewald stated I raised my fist, shouted push forward, and resisted arrest by locking my arms with another protester. I have provided 6 witness statements contradicting this. Each witness was present. They all confirm I positioned myself between the crowd and the police and requested people to move backward. Drury retrieved a folder from her bag and placed it on the table. She also stated a request had been submitted for a subpoena of Officer Grunewald's prior complaints, noting there were 3 related to misconduct during public gatherings, all of which have been dismissed quietly. A ripple of reaction passed through the gallery. Drury raised an objection. She questioned the relevance, asking if the complaints had resulted in a conviction. Alma turned, her voice firm, asserting that a pattern of behavior matters, particularly when it's the same behavior repeated. The judge raised a hand to quiet the room. Please focus, Ms. Whitaker. She nodded once, then presented a second document. I also want to discuss the photograph the prosecution introduced as evidence. Exhibit C, the image depicting me mid-step, encircled by police officers. She displayed the printout. The prosecution asserted this indicated I was advancing towards the officers, seemingly ready to oppose arrest. However, if you examine it closely, she provided a magnified copy to the clerk. You'll observe my palms are raised, open, directed outwards. This is a widely recognized gesture of de-escalation. She looked at the jury again. One doesn't approach armed police with raised hands unless attempting to avert a greater harm. The room was silent. There was no laughter now. Even the gallery had leaned forward. Drury attempted to regain control. Despite those gestures, the defendant disregarded a legal instruction to leave. Alma turned to him slowly. What legal instruction, Mr. Drury? The arrest record details an order issued by Officer Grunwald at 6:32 p.m. A time-stamped photo demonstrated that I was already in restraints by 6:28. She paused, allowing that information to register. This suggested the order was either issued belatedly or wasn't given at all. Judge Hallbrook moved, appearing noticeably uneasy. Leland remained silent. Alma inhaled deeply. Therefore, considering the absence of audio recordings, the conflicting timeline, the missing video, and the testimony that disputes witness accounts, what remains to support prosecution? She did not appear self-satisfied. She expressed no sense of triumph. She seemed weary. Weary, as if she's faced this scenario countless times and understood the process intimately. Alma then introduced a surprising element, video evidence that fundamentally altered the case. She placed a small USB drive across the table, explaining that it contained footage recorded by a college student, Victor Ramirez. He had been filming from the second floor of the parking garage, overlooking City Hall. I've already submitted it to the clerk for review, Judge Hallbrook observed. What does this video depict? Alma responded directly. The clerk placed the drive into the court screen system. A grainy yet stable video appeared on the monitor. It showed the protest happening below. People were shouting and holding signs, while police officers created a barricade. Then, Alma became visible, her small figure moving through the crowd. She was not shouting. She did not raise her fists. She did not link arms or chant. She was waving her hands down in a motion recognizable to anyone who had previously broken up a fight. Back up! Her voice rang out, surprisingly loud and clear for a woman her age. Don't push, stay calm. The video captured the entire incident. She positioned herself between 2 officers and a group of teenagers holding cardboard signs. She faced the crowd, not the police. Her hands were raised, again palms outward. Shortly after, one officer lunged. Another joined in. They seized her arms, pulled her backward, and placed handcuffs on her. She offered no resistance. She displayed no reaction. The room was completely silent. Following an additional 30 seconds of footage, the screen faded to black. Alma addressed Judge Holbrook. The officer's report stated that I charged the barrier, urging others to defy. However, in that video, I was the sole individual attempting to prevent the situation from worsening. That video was not presented by the prosecution, despite Officer Grunewald's knowledge of its existence. According to information, Victor provided a copy to the department the day following the protest. He received no response. Holbrook glanced at the bench, his jaw tense. Mr. Drury was asked, "Did your office receive this footage?" Leland Drury's face appeared pale. He stated, "I was not informed, Your Honor." Alma did not look at him. It wasn't necessary. Mr. Ramirez reported that he provided it to a plainclothes officer, who informed him it wasn't required. He speculated that they had already determined their version of events. A woman in the gallery murmured, "Lord have mercy." The judge's gavel fell once, a gentle sound intended to restore order. He regarded Alma as if encountering her anew. "You stated you retired in 2003? She affirmed, "That is correct." Following 20 years of observing cases similar to this, he inclined his body forward. "And why return now?" Her tone became gentler. "Because I grew weary of awaiting another person's concern." She advanced several steps, not for effect, but because remaining seated was no longer possible. "I had hoped that if I simply adhered to the guidelines, remained quiet in retirement, read the paper, and offered occasional assistance, perhaps the world would resolve itself. However, the reality is that Mr. Drury's actions aren't unprecedented. Officer Grunewald's behavior isn't new. This pattern, this tendency of accusing first, investigating later, that's not a recent development. I'm familiar with it. I've observed it since I was 30 years old, and it hasn't diminished." She addressed the jury, her gaze sweeping across the panel. "I didn't come here today to create a spectacle. I am here because if this court determines my guilt relying on the testimony of individuals who are not entirely truthful, then what becomes of the next person lacking supporting evidence, or a recorded statement, or the courage to come forward?" There was no response. Even Drury had become completely still. Judge Holbrook leaned back slowly in his chair, but just as the situation seemed as dire as it could be for the prosecution, Alma brought the room to a complete standstill. Alma reached into her handbag once more, carefully and deliberately, and produced a folded document. It appeared unassuming, lacking a prominent legal stamp or highlighted sections, simply a standard police transcript printed on regular letter paper. "I'd like to read something into the record," she stated calmly, from Officer Timothy Bragg, who was present that afternoon but not called as a witness. Judge Holbrook scrutinized her. "Was this statement presented to the court prior to today?" Alma responded, shaking her head once. "It was not. I received this document yesterday through a records request. The process was challenging and required me to call upon a few previous obligations." She flattened the paper and began reading. "I arrived on scene at approximately 6:15 p.m. I observed Alma Whitaker moving through the crowd, repeatedly telling people to step back and remain peaceful. I did not witness her shout aggressively, or instigate. When I saw her being taken into custody, I was surprised, as she was the only individual I observed attempting to calm tensions." She glanced upward, allowing the quiet to linger. Leland Drury adjusted his position in his chair. His fingers momentarily played with the pen. "That officer was not involved in the arrest. Does that mean his account is unreliable?" Alma completed his thought, her voice now more pointed. "Then why wasn't his name mentioned in the witness list provided by your office, not even as an addendum? You state your pursuit is of the facts, Mr. Drury, yet the facts that dispute your narrative are discreetly omitted." The judge asked Mr. Drury, "Can you confirm whether Officer Bragg was interviewed during the investigation?" Drury paused. I'd have to check the original intake file." "There's no need," Alma stated. "I verified. He submitted his statement the night of the arrest. It was signed, time-stamped, and remained unreviewed, unmentioned." She approached the jury once more. This case was never about disorder. The aim was to make an illustration of an individual who appeared harmless but refused to conform. She indicated softly towards the screen, which remained dark from the preceding video. They hadn't anticipated someone like me would speak. And after I did, they attempted to characterize me as disruptive. That term is employed when people are reluctant to acknowledge their discomfort with being questioned. A juror, a man in his 60s with a neatly trimmed beard, massaged the bridge of his nose and glanced downward. The others watched Alma intently, their attention complete. Judge Hallbrook appeared weary, not due to Alma, but because of the situation unfolding before him. Your Honor, she spoke quietly. I request that all charges be dismissed based on procedural misconduct, incomplete evidence submission, and the suppression of exculpatory testimony. The judge remained silent for a moment. He clasped his hands and looked at the bench, tapping one finger in a steady beat. The courtroom held its breath. Alma remained silent. It wasn't necessary. Eventually, Hallbrook raised his head. I will consider the request and reconvene following a brief pause, he stated. Alma acknowledged his words with a nod and returned to her place. Her hands were firm. There were no written notes, no additional legal representatives, no elaborate ceremony, only years of practice, and a resolute conviction that truth held significance, even when others were unwilling to acknowledge it. As the courtroom cleared for recess, Leland Drury hesitated before rising. He remained in his seat, appearing as someone who had just understood they'd brought a spoon to a gunfight. When Judge Hallbrook attempted to regain control of the proceedings, Alma took an action that quieted the entire room. Upon resuming, the atmosphere had noticeably changed. The laughter and knowing comments had disappeared. Even those in the gallery sat more upright and silently, as if drawn into something more serious than anyone anticipated. Judge Hallbrook returned, his face grave. The gavel struck once, a gesture seemingly perfunctory, and then Alma rose. She avoided legal terminology and refrained from raising her voice. She simply began to speak. There was a period, she started, when I would hurry into courtrooms carrying 20 case files, often repeating the same suit 3 times a week due to financial limitations. This occurred in 1987, in Detroit, at the Public Defender's office on East Grand Boulevard. Her voice remained steady, yet it carried an underlying sense of weight. I recall representing a 17-year-old, Ronaldo Briggs, who had been arrested because he fit the description of a purse snatcher. He was on his way home from school, carrying a trumpet case. The officer stated that he appeared nervous. One understands what nervous signifies when you are young, black, and walking alone. The courtroom was silent. The prosecution presented no purse, no eyewitness testimony, and no confession. The only evidence was that he attempted to flee when 2 officers emerged from an unmarked van. I paused, allowing my statement to resonate. The legal proceedings lasted 5 weeks. For 5 weeks, I sifted through evidence that others had discarded. I found a receipt for a school lunch inside his backpack, showing a timestamp 10 minutes prior to the crime. The police were dismissed from the case. By then, however, Ronaldo had missed his final band competition and lost his scholarship, not to inflict blame, but to offer a tangible and lasting message. Cases like his remained with me, not because they were unusual, but because they occurred frequently. Too frequently. She inhaled deeply, centering herself. Do you believe I am here today because I enjoy conflict? Because I long for the extended hours and limited tolerance common in courtrooms such as this? She addressed Judge Hallbrook, her tone calm. No, Your Honor, I am here because an unacceptable number of individuals like Ronaldo do not receive a second opportunity. Had I remained silent, had I simply departed when the protest began to escalate, another child might have occupied this seat, a child unable to advocate for themselves. She moved nearer to the bench. I'm weary of feigning that quiet ensures our security. Hallbrook's hands were now clasped, his knuckles pale against the wood of the bench. He remained silent. He appeared as though he desired to speak. Alma redirected her gaze toward Drury. You're young? She asked him without harshness. Perhaps you still believe the system is equitable until demonstrated otherwise. However, that's inaccurate. The system is imperfect until someone insists on something superior. That's the duty. If you are unwilling to accept that responsibility, Then this is not the appropriate venue, Drury said, his face reddening. He remained silent, unable to answer. Alma went back to her place. The quiet persisted. After a minute, Judge Hallbrook made a sound as he cleared his throat and looked toward the clerk. But first he touched his forehead, as if the past was suddenly heavy upon him as well. He began to speak, then stopped. This wasn't for effect. It was simply a moment of hesitation. He appeared, for the first time in years, like a man questioning the words before him. I have examined the evidence presented by the defense, he stated finally, referencing the witness video, the police transcript, and the timing discrepancies. His voice faltered but subtly. This case was not managed appropriately, and it is the court's view that proceeding would be unfair. The courtroom was utterly silent. Ms. Whitaker, he said, his tone now more strained, this court dismisses all charges. A hush fell. There were no cheers, no vocal reactions, just a stunned silence, as if people were waiting for direction on how to respond. Alma did not smile. She closed her bag, rose, and nodded. This was not a gesture of triumph, but of respect. At that moment, Judge Hallbrook, for the first time in years, found himself speechless. Within the courthouse, the sunlight streamed in, bright, dry, and sharp, much as it always did in Bakersfield around noon. Alma descended the courthouse stairs deliberately, not due to any physical weakness, but because she understood the value of savoring significant moments. She held her handbag securely beneath one arm, the soles of her shoes making a quiet sound against the pavement. Journalists waited expectantly on the sidewalk, their cameras already recording, microphones extended like lures. Many of them hadn't been present when the trial commenced. News had circulated regarding the retired black woman who entered the courtroom unaccompanied and emerged with the truth. Ms. Whitaker, are you considering legal action against the city? Did you anticipate the case's dismissal? Do you identify as an activist? She remained silent, not to evade attention, but because she had already spoken her piece, and that courtroom had been her sole intended audience. A small group of people waited for her at the foot of the steps. They weren't journalists. They were younger, late teens, perhaps early 20s, wearing hoodies, carrying backpacks, and sporting worn sneakers. Alma recognized one of them as Victor Ramirez, the student who had filmed the video. He kept his phone lowered, no longer recording, simply observing her. A young woman moved forward. She appeared to be just out of high school, her eyes bright and nervous. Ms. Whitaker, she said, I hope to be a lawyer someday, like you. Alma smiled for the first time all day. She offered a small smile, indicating her attention. The girl continued, that was the first time I saw someone actually win in court like that. You didn't just fight. You taught. Alma met her gaze directly. Then remember what you saw, because it won't always look that way. Most days it'll feel like pushing a brick wall uphill with your bare hands, and no one will applaud you. But you push anyway. Victor then spoke. The system had never anticipated someone like you possessing the ability to retaliate. I understand, she replied softly. They relied on it. A different boy interjected, could we learn from you? Perhaps by observing you closely, or conducting an interview, or something similar. You've witnessed events we've only read about. Alma surveyed the group, hesitating. She didn't aspire to be anyone's rescuer, yet she detected something within their gazes she hadn't observed in a considerable time. Hope intertwined with impatience. That familiar intensity. She straightened the handle of her bag. I avoid social media platforms. While I don't maintain a website, I still retain the ability to teach. Please bring your questions, and I'll provide the coffee. The group responded with quiet laughter. Victor's eyes lit up. Behind them, Judge Hallbrook stood at the top of the stairs, observing everything. He was not accompanied by deputies at this time. He wore a blazer and a loose tie instead of a robe. For a brief moment, he seemed poised to speak, but then he remained silent. He observed Alma disappear around the corner with the children, her form gradually diminishing in the late afternoon sunlight. Returning inside, Leland Drury remained at his desk, his case file spread out but unexamined. His demeanor had altered. The usual self-satisfaction was absent. The characteristic severity softened. He looked at Alma's bar card resting on the bench, momentarily overlooked. Then, he reached for it, not to challenge it, but to review it. That name, that date, that accumulation of experience. The courtroom stood deserted now, yet something had changed within him. Perhaps not enough to alter everything immediately, but potentially enough to make him reconsider in the future. For the first time, he had witnessed the distinction between winning a case and truly comprehending justice. However, what Alma subsequently conveyed to those kids provided them with something beyond legal counsel. It offered them a foundation for hope. The diner on Union Avenue was nearly empty when Alma sat down with the kids that evening. She selected the booth by the window, the very one she'd occupied years ago when she used to meet with apprehensive clients who lacked confidence in courtrooms. The light from the setting sun illuminated the worn leather seats and transformed the Formica table a warm, golden hue. Victor requested coffee, despite not typically consuming it. The young woman, identified as Kenya, asked for iced tea and retrieved a notebook, already filled with notes. The remaining individuals positioned themselves closer, as if witnessing a solemn event. Alma didn't begin a lecture. She stirred her cup deliberately, then remarked, "You know the first thing they teach you in law school?" Victor blinked. "The Constitution?" She smiled faintly. "No, they teach you how to read a case file without getting emotional, how to separate the fact from the feelings, how to argue without letting it get under your skin." Kenya leaned forward. "Is that a good thing?" "It's necessary," Alma said, "but dangerous, too. The tendency to overlook the individuals behind the data can be insidious. It's easy to lose sight of the human element." She paused, setting her spoon down and meeting their gazes. "Remember the people." A quiet stillness settled over the group, not awkward but contemplative. One of the boys, previously silent, then voiced a question. "But how does one continue when there's no audience?" Alma released a slow breath, feeling the gravity of that inquiry. "You persist because occasionally someone is paying attention. They will only grasp the truth if it's spoken aloud, even when your voice trembles, even when the atmosphere chills." Kenya jotted notes rapidly in her notebook, but Alma countered, "Don't record this. Experience it. Make errors. Watch it, but maintain your integrity." Victor reclined in the booth. "Do you ever question it? Remaining engaged for this duration?" Alma hesitated. Her fingers followed the edge of her cup. "The loss of each client who deserved to be released weighed on me. Witnessing officers fabricate stories without hesitation caused me regret. And observing juries prioritize ease over honesty often made me question the value of my efforts." She paused, gazing out the window, but then I recalled the individuals who were ultimately freed, those whose voices were amplified, those who contacted me 5 years later simply to express gratitude. That is what truly holds significance. Victor nodded thoughtfully. Alma concluded her coffee and rose. The check had already been taken care of. Kenya had discreetly placed the bills beneath the sugar jar. Standing outside on the sidewalk, the children paused, seeming reluctant for the evening to conclude. Alma addressed them. "Do you want to change the system?" They affirmed. "Then don't merely study it. Challenge it. Pose more insightful questions. Confront the absence of discussion. Engage your intellect. Utilize your mobility. Employ your writing. And when someone advises you to wait your turn, inquire as to their reasoning for believing it's not your turn already." Kenya wiped her eyes. The others remained silent, observing her intently. Then Alma spoke a final statement. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who refused to be quiet." Following this, she proceeded towards the bus stop without turning back. Some stories transcend sensational news. They serve as reminders. That authority isn't consistently found in ceremonial garments or official positions, nor does it originate from the most vocal individual. Occasionally, it originates from a woman wearing a cardigan, managing the system as if she's performed this task previously. Because she has. When people inquire about the appearance of justice, they should recall her name, Alma Vernice Whitaker. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who would benefit from hearing it. And if you agree that wisdom isn't dictated by attire, please subscribe to hear more authentic stories that help us understand ourselves.